You are waiting in line at the checkout line of your local supermarket, and even though this is a respite from what is a fairly boring, somewhat weekly chore, you are surrounded by the slow motion horror show of an all encompassing an ecological catastrophe of such magnitude and scale that it can only compare to a handful of events in the entire history of the planet, one of which rendered the dinosaurs extinct. Everything around you is part of a systematic assault on the ecosphere, an assault so complete it literally envelops you, from the clothes you are wearing to the food you are about to purchase, and everything else. At the corner of the checkout aisle is one of these seemingly newish additions to the convenience of the checkout process, a fluorescently illuminated half cooler filled with all kinds of soft drinks with which to slake your thirst during the rigmarole of loading your packaged food items onto a miniature conveyor belt. And the soft drinks seem innocuous enough, at least the ones that aren't glowing some sort of aposematic green or orange, like the Coca-Cola, which is ensconced in that all too familiar red and white plastic packaging. This plastic, comes from petroleum byproducts like HGL and natural gas, at least in the US, as it may well be synthesized from crude oil in other parts of the world, but regardless, certainly comes from some limited, finite fuel that is extracted from the earth at great material and environmental cost, only to be spun into the throwaway packaging that is non-biodegradable, all because some corporate pencil pusher fell in love with plastic's strength to weight ratio in 1994 after realizing the billions of dollars at stake. All of which is to say nothing about how this PET bottle might leach endocrine disruptors or carcinogens like phthalates or antimony into your Coke. And this, of course, goes without mentioning that the second leading ingredient in Coca-Cola, high fructose corn syrup, is problematic for reasons beyond its deleterious health effects, mainly its contribution to the monolithic growth of the corn industry, which now nearly dominates the entirety of the Midwest, creating a monoculture that stretches from western Nebraska to central Pennsylvania, one that is almost single-handedly responsible for the rise of neonicotinoid pesticides, a banned substance in the EU suspected of causing colony collapse disorder in bees and general declines in bird populations. A monoculture that in using over 6 million tons of nitrogen in fertilizer and manure is definitely responsible for the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, as fertilizer runoff sluices through our tributaries and waterways all the way through the delta of the Mississippi into the sea, where the concentration of nitrogen and phosphorus leads to algal blooms that pull the oxygen out of the water, leaving a giant portion of the Caribbean uninhabited, an area as large as Rhode Island and Connecticut combined. All of which seems at least as troubling as the alleged reports that Coca-Cola worked with FARC paramilitary guerrillas to terrorize workers in their bottling plants in Colombia and prevent them from unionizing. And think of what would happen if you finished that super sugary beverage right there, and how you'd be forced to pitch the bottle in an ordinary trash receptacle because this particular grocery chain doesn't offer convenient recycling bins near the exits or checkout lanes, and you toss it in the trash for the sake of convenience, knowing you didn't want to lug all zero point 0.5 ounces of a plastic empty bottle to dispose of it properly, knowing full well that it would end up in a landfill where it can only slowly degrade over time because it's non-biodegradable, through the slow attrition of erosion as over years sun and rain break it into smaller pieces of polymer chains until they are small enough to be mobilized by rainwater, and this plasticky trash water seeps into the closest available water table and continues to move from stream to river to ocean, perhaps reducing in size along the way, eventually getting spat out into one of the five great plastic islands that inhabit the gyres in the world's oceans, the largest of which resides in the Pacific and is greater than the size of Texas, because that's the life cycle of something as ubiquitous and immortal like plastic. Next to the soda cooler is a rack of tawdry gossip rags that have the latest in manufactured news about the House of Windsor or the Kardashians. And if that isn't good enough, there are glossy magazines featuring men and women with impossibly good physiques and million-dollar smiles suggesting new recipes or sex tips to revitalize your banal home life, all of which are presented in bold, eye-popping fonts, which, when coupled with these images of stylized youth and staggering beauty, create this really obnoxious type of brio, akin to that of an overzealous Mormon, the type of energy that is impossible to relate to when you are stuck in the soul-crushingly boring line in the supermarket where part of you just wants to escape and be somewhere else, anywhere else. You know that it's close to the end of the month, but there still are an unsellable number of copies of this month's Men's Fitness to sell, not just in this checkout lane, but in each and every nearly identical lane, all the way down. And if the clerk who is in charge of restocking the shelves, the same clerk who isn't paid enough to care, decides to go out of his way in a few days to recycle what must be more than 50 unsold magazines, constituting thousands of pages of what is now deemed useless advertisements and articles, if that clerk decides to redeem the lives of the trees that already died so you could glance over a blurb about 10-minute abs, then those magazines will make their way back to a paper recycling plant where they'll be treated in a series of washing cycles that separate the paper and ink and create different levels of a waste that is colloquially called sludge, some of which gets dumped in a landfill, some of which is a hazardous and toxic byproduct of the de-inking process. And this all creates water pollution and air pollution and does little to stop the fact that you use about 749 pounds of paper per year and recycle only about half of it. And what if the clerk just throws them in the trash to begin with? At this point, if you're anything like me, you will mentally wince and find yourself almost unconsciously reaching for your iPhone and the carousel of endless digital distractions a fingertip away. The problem is, once you begin to perceive the ecological catastrophe in everything, it's impossible to stop. Because it's in everything, especially your iPhone. Behind that stunning display are a host of micro-components, capacitors, processors, circuit boards, all seamlessly designed to deliver you sensory pleasure instantaneously. And in them are minerals, conflict minerals, tin, gold, tantalum, tungsten, that make your iPhone an iPhone. They are called conflict minerals because corporations are really good at creating profoundly understated, banal-sounding euphemisms for horrifying things that create negative publicity. These are, in fact, blood minerals from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a horrifying civil war has claimed more than 5 million lives since 1998, making it the bloodiest conflict since World War II, a conflict so brutal that its toll cannot even be measured in lives, a conflict where rape has been institutionalized by all sides, indiscriminate rape against women, men, small children, and babies, a conflict colored by cannibalism, child soldiers, and slave labor. Rival militias lord over the mines and use forced labor to extract raw minerals, which are then smuggled over the border to Rwanda and Burundi, in turn bringing back the profits which are used to acquire more weapons, funneling a perpetual war that drives down the price of these commodities. There are no regulations for mining, no restrictions, no governmental supervision, no measurement of the poisons in the local waterways. And honestly, what unknown ecological horrors are being reaped in the DRC pales in comparison to the humanitarian crisis that is as close to hell as you can get this side of eternity. These minerals, like raw, unprocessed coltan, are exported to refineries, where they are smelted into tantalite and tantalum and sold to companies like Apple, Dell, Hewlett-Packard, GE, or any other recognizable name in consumer electronics you can think of. And it doesn't stop there. The refined tantalum is then shipped to China, where Apple subsidiaries like Foxconn and Shenzhen manufacture the phones for Apple. Foxconn, a company who, in response to a spate of worker suicides due to abysmal working conditions, erected suicide prevention netting around its dormitories to catch the jumpers. Foxconn, who requested that workers sign no suicide pledges and mandated that they sign a legally binding contract stating that their children could not sue Foxconn as a result of suicide, self-harm, or unexpected death. All of this for an iPhone, whose life cycle hasn't even been completed because the phone is then boxed, complete with plastic seal and superfluous plastic packaging, then loaded onto one of the world's 90,000 cargo shipping vessels for transport to the US. Cargo shipping vessels, which are far and wide the biggest polluters in terms of transport in the world, emitting approximately 260 times more sulfur oxides in the air per year than all the cars on the Earth combined. Cargo shipping vessels that burn through 7.29 million barrels of oil a day. Cargo shipping vessels that account for 90% of the world's shipping by volume. Cargo shipping vessels that are completely unregulated because they operate in international waters where there are no laws or regulations to prevent the emission of sulfur oxides that cause asthma, cancer, and acid rain. If these concepts of pollution seem abstract, then maybe you aren't quantifying the issue appropriately, because these particulate matter emissions from cargo shipping vessels contribute to around 60,000 deaths a year. And it doesn't stop there, because everywhere your eye touches highlights another one of these inescapable little modern horrors, like the rack behind the tabloids that holds all the infinite variations of what, at least ingredient-wise, seems to be the same candy bar. The rack which is expediently located at the precise place where impulse buying is at its maximum efficacy. The rack which is laden with all the diabetes-inducing treats that contain more sugar in a single serving than the average person in India eats in an entire day, all of which are wrapped in an ambiguous, shiny, metallic-looking plastic that is not recyclable whatsoever, wrapping that surrounds a chocolate most likely produced by child slaves in West Africa. And if you avert your eyes from the presence of child slavery in your favorite indulgence, you only find yourself looking at some more commonplace tragedy, like all the gum wrappers that, while being made of recyclable material, foil and paper, are still totally unrecyclable because of the weird marriage these products have undergone. Or you'll find your gaze drifting to the flimsy, ubiquitous plastic bags that the cashier is now putting groceries into, the plastic bags that never hold much and always seem to rip and tear open at the exact moment when your hands are full and can do nothing about it, which seems like a much more acceptable tragedy when compared to the fact that we as Americans use and throw away 100 billion plastic bags a year, which only takes 12 million barrels of crude oil to fabricate, which, when weighed out on the ever-shifting scales of ecocide, seems almost inconsequential, right? It may seem that way because in front of you, on that worn-down conveyor belt that has streaks on it from God knows when or what, is a lump of reconstituted mystery meat labeled ground beef chuck and lovingly wrapped in ample plastic atop a styrofoam tray that claims to be recyclable but in all likelihood isn't. And what's disturbing about this meat isn't the plastics or the pink slime or even that weird thing that is supposed to absorb the blood that always manages to look like an overworked panty liner. What's disturbing isn't how you abstract your relationship with meat and where it comes from by surrounding it in nomenclature that seems more stomach-friendly, like how you call pig pork or bacon or sausage instead of calling it pig. And what's disturbing isn't the atrocious conditions that animals endure before their long walk through the slaughterhouse. It's not how the meatpacking industry has the highest rate of injury of any industry by far in the US of A, or even how basically all ground beef carries fecal bacteria in it. No, what's far more disturbing is that animal agriculture is responsible for 18 to 51% of all greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, that nearly half of the area of the continental US is devoted to animal agriculture, and 55% of water consumed here is for animal agriculture as well. No, it's definitely far more disturbing to think of the simple facts that 2,500 dairy cows produce the same amount of waste as a city with a population of 411,000. That pound of beef required 2,500 gallons of water to be produced. That worldwide, 50% of grain is fed to livestock, while one person dies every 4 seconds from hunger or hunger-related causes. Maybe the only thing more disturbing than that is that on average you eat more than 200 pounds of meat a year. Or maybe not. Not in comparison to the can of tuna on the same shop-worn conveyor belt, can lined with bisphenol A or BPA, a polymer used in an epoxy that keeps the tuna from sticking to the can and or rusting it. BPA, which leaches into your foods and acts as estradiol. BPA, which is literally a plastic that becomes a xenoestrogen and wreaks havoc on your endocrine system, which may or may not be worse than the mercury in the tuna, which is neurotoxic and lipophilic. And because of tuna's place in the hierarchy of life, it bioamplifies and has an increased concentration while still being the second most popular seafood consumed in the US. All of which speaks nothing of how you're contributing to the overfishing of the world's ocean, nothing about the billions of pounds of other fish that were caught and killed and then discarded as bykill or bycatch because they weren't what was marketable when dead. And that, if this trend continues, you could see fishless oceans by 2048. Or maybe what's really terrifying are all the microbeads in the toothpaste you are about to purchase, which might give you a brighter smile while polluting your waterways. Or maybe it's the toothbrush itself, made again from the same non-recyclable plastics. Or maybe it's the soft plastics that you're wearing right now, all the petroleum products that went into your shoes, all the child labor and poverty labor that went into the clothes you are wearing. Or maybe it's the propylene glycol in your deodorant, or the BHT in your cereal, or the palm oil in your mayo. Or maybe what is absolutely chilling and blood-curdling is you are so used to all of these crises and disasters in and around the things that you eat and wear and use that you long ago learned not to care in any significant way whatsoever. Because if you did, you would be paralyzed and worse, powerless to do anything about it. What's terrifying is that your reaction is not in any way unique. While you may not have thought about these particular issues, you have thought about how to think of them. Whether you know it or not, you've literally had an entire lifetime of training for this. Since you've been born, you've been inculcated and indoctrinated in the ideology of consumerism, an ideology so airtight that you can defend it in less time than it takes to blink, all without consciously thinking about it. Please don't take this the wrong way. I know it might sound like I'm making some vaguely socialist overstatement here, but all I'm trying to say is that the average city-dwelling American, like you and me, is exposed to around 3,000 advertisements a day, and yet you probably can't name the last one you saw, or heard, or watched. We are so used to advertisements and the logical calculus behind them that they have become an unconscious part of ourselves, how we process desire and how we construct thought. Let's go back to the supermarket checkout line. If you have any heart, as your scope of understanding increases, so too do those gut pangs of anxiety and guilt for participating in something so hideously ugly, something so incongruent with your image of yourself. These are the physical symptoms of our cognitive dissonance. For most of us, they don't last long, as we long ago learned how to leave this mental place of discomfort without having to change our behavior. Because we don't like to feel uncomfortable. We don't like to feel like we are both simultaneously responsible for disaster and yet powerless to stop it. So our minds, in what is a naked act of self-preservation, employ a host of defense mechanisms to keep us from feeling too paralyzed with guilt. Most of these defenses don't hold up to scrutiny, but they aren't supposed to. They are designed to assuage us of those dirty feelings we get when we realize our culpability in all of this. They are designed to be knee-jerk, split-second responses, and they kind of just fall apart if we bother to unpackage them from their normal place in our mess of thoughts. Most of these defense mechanisms look like and pass for normal logical thoughts when they are anything but. They are rationalizations, intellectual and smart-sounding ideas with no foundation, ideas that are made to defend our unjustified behaviors. For example, one of the common ones that gets bandied about is that somehow technological innovation will take care of all of these ecological and humanitarian problems we've created. It's a cute rejoinder to all of our worries, one we can easily identify with if we are optimistic and have some grasp of Moore's law. But on closer inspection, it doesn't really pass the smell test. I suppose it would make sense if somehow humanity got its figurative shit together and utilized technology in some sort of appropriate, egalitarian, and responsible manner, instead of using science to prolong erections, or jam more pixels into an LCD display, or make higher payload bombs, or more efficient drones to drop them with. This rationalization only makes sense if we completely decontextualize technology from the entire history of human civilization. It's easy to forget that most of the greatest technological innovations of the last century, like the internet or the microwave, were developed by the military. It's easy to forget that technology is one of the reasons we are currently living through the sixth mass extinction event in the Earth's history. Is it even remotely likely that if some game-changing technology were invented, it would be available to everyone? And if so, why would that Promethean proliferation be more possible in the future than the spread of nuclear technology is now? If the idea of technology saving us from ourselves sounds good, it's because it's an unfalsifiable claim. It sounds good because we have selective hearing. It appeals to the self-confirmation bias within all of us. It's the reason we like the same bullshitty logic and blind optimism behind most TED Talks or Reddit front page posts about a cure for cancer that never seems to materialize. It all sounds so good because it's the idea that everything will get better with time, regardless of all the evidence to the contrary. That at the end of the day, we will be saved by a technological singularity. If this all sounds familiar, it should. It's the same narrative device of Deus Ex Machina that's the contrived resolution in countless numbers of stories, plays, and TV shows that we've ingested. And that's just one of the myriad of rationalizations we deploy in the blink of an eye. And it's not even my favorite. I don't know about you, but I tend to fall back on rationalizing my behavior by the fact that I'm in a grocery store surrounded by other people who are doing exactly the same thing I'm doing. Even though a cursory examination of the people around me reveals that they have drastically different consumption habits than I do, and they all look somewhat bovine or porcine. Even though I can still hear the voice of my mom echoing in my head, "If everyone jumped off a bridge, would you too?" Despite knowing all this, I still catch myself doing this unconsciously. I find myself being desirous of things that I think other people will like, whether it's the new LeBrons or the new iPhone. I find myself replicating behavior I see other people doing, all the while oblivious to thinking that they might be stuck in the same monkey see, monkey do feedback loop as I am. That's one of the most insidious things about this thinking that's been imprinted in my brain by millions of commercials. That these mimetic patterns of consumption that I am mirroring have all been modeled for us in advertisements. That the everybody is doing it defense that I'm quick to reach for is just a stone's throw away from Nike's Just Do It slogan. The sad truth here is that the brands that I gravitate towards have less to do with my own personal discernment and more to do with me being told what to consume and blindly following others doing the same thing. Everyone doing exactly what they were told to do. It's a belief in a belief. My parents use a different rationalization. They shop at Whole Foods and give money to the Sierra Club and believe that in doing so, they are making the correct, ethical, and responsible choice. I know many people who think this way, who think that by making the best choice or the greenest purchase, they are somehow making the earth a better place to live. It's simply whitewashing the guilt of consumption away through consuming things that claim to offset the evil that consumption itself creates. The operative word being claim, because we already know that the terms all natural, USDA organic, and wild caught are effectively meaningless. The defense for this behavior is already built into the product itself. It's sold with a narrative that is its own rationalization. As long as my folks feel like they're doing something better, it doesn't matter that those cloying monthly newsletters from the Sierra Club that use gratuitous amounts of paper almost always end up in the trash. It doesn't matter that the products at Whole Foods are still wrapped in plastic, still delivered by semi-trucks, still part of the giant cycle of consumption and waste. This rationalization reflects another great hypocrisy, that we unquestionably consume products presented as eco-friendly or socially conscious, like the Toyota Prius or Tom's shoes, not because they actually make the world a better place, because they don't, but because they make us feel better about ourselves. And by using these products, we advertise the fact that we like to feel better to the whole world. It's problematic in that it encourages us to buy more, newer, greener things, and this behavior of discarding a product due to its perceived obsolescence is actually one of the real problems facing us, not a solution. And these are just a few rationalizations out of many that are hardwired into our synapses and dendrites from childhood. You may, for instance, justify your contribution to ecocide by mentally zooming out and conceptualizing the problem as an abstract one that, like all abstractions, is unsolvable. We use abstraction as a mental shorthand so often that the truth of how and where our goods come from is deeply unsettling. If you think I'm overstating this, watch a video of a cow being skinned. That's where leather comes from. That's where your beef comes from. And that's why abstraction is so handy, because it serves as an intermediate step in dissociative thinking that helps sanitize the visceral violence of reality. We think this way because intuitively we don't want to know how the sausage is made, because deep down we all know it's nauseating. In this case, you are abstracting by shifting the goalpost from being about the consequences of your actions to being about large faceless nouns and isms, absolving yourself of your responsibility by masking yourself as a powerless cog in the giant machinery of the world. It's the same disempowered logic that you've heard a parent or grandparent mindlessly repeat when they say, "That's just the way the world is." It's a weird surrender to a greater form of authoritarianism, a complete capitulation of any personal agency whatsoever. But it's effective because we've learned to defer to authority. The irony of this defense is that it is the ultimate acceptance of the initial powerlessness that caused us discomfort to begin with. We are, in essence, conceding our will to the powers that be, the same ones that put us in the exact dilemma we are in today. There are, of course, a million more of these defense mechanisms and palliative excuses that you might wield. You could be the type to subscribe to the just world hypothesis and believe that the people who suffer on your behalf actually deserve it. Or you may think that you are generally a good person, doing the best you could be expected to do given the circumstances. Or you might be like my grandfather and just live in a permanent state of denial. You've probably already noticed that there's a subtle operant logic at play here, that at the heart of all these justifications is the notion that the truth about reality is already a known commodity, that your way of life is unassailable, and that even if there are any problems with it, it's still better than all the other options. Not many people who aren't elderly or Fox News pundits actually ever voice this opinion out loud, but yet it remains the tacit assumption that underpins this whole line of thought. It's this subconscious idea that our way of life is better than everybody else's, and that this is, by all means, an objective fact backed by all sorts of empirical evidence. This moral relativism goes to our deepest levels of programming, so far so that we take it for granted that this is an assumed fact, that we are better. This mindset is by no means unique to us as Americans. As if we went to North Korea, I'm sure most North Koreans would have the same exact sentiments about their society. And likewise, if we went almost anywhere else in the world or at any other point in history, etc., etc., sure, it's a red flag that we share this ideology of superiority with a fascist state that allows for almost no freedom of expression. But it's also a testament to the universality of our need to feel better than another group of people, for us to feel justified in our way of being, if only through comparison. It's this very human need to feel this way that makes this American exceptionalism so dangerous. It's dangerous for a lot of reasons, but none more so than it allows us to write a blank check for justifications. Because if the rest of the world is indeed only populated by godless savages, and I believe that I am on the winning team, then the ends always justify the means, and I will always be backed by moral authority, no matter what my actions. This is the slippery slope of moral relativism that we've all had drummed into our skulls under the guise of American exceptionalism. And as I'm sure you've noticed, it's a handmaiden of a greater prevailing sense of nihilism that allows our system of consumerism to flourish at the expense of everything else. I don't mean to say that we as Americans actually identify as nihilists, only that it is the ethos, or rather the anti-ethos of our age. Not many people who aren't conspicuously trying to appear edgy are going to actively say that they believe in nothing. And yet nihilism saturates our media landscape, from the funny bright side of nihilism in Seinfeld, Sex and the City, and Girls, to the darker shades in Dexter, Breaking Bad, and Mad Men. Our cultural nihilism is like background radiation. It's invisible and always there. I, for one, don't mind that religion and morality have been pushed out of the public sphere. Their departure has much to recommend it. It has led to women's rights, gay rights, and the new Batman movies. But in their wake, we collectively needed something to explain away the evils that remained reiterated on the nightly news, and nihilism was and is the perfect fit. Because when we look at the world, the violence of the world, the religious terrorism, the mass shootings, the war, the poverty, the pollution, it's overwhelming to the point where it all just seems so absurd and meaningless. And this is a seductive way of thinking about the ills of reality, because it's easy. It's easier to deal with all the pain and horror with apathy and detachment rather than with feeling and empathy. It requires a lot less of us to not care. We rarely acknowledge that this nihilism creates nihilism, or that this is a sneaky, tacit endorsement of the status quo, or that the void created by nihilism is conveniently filled by crass materialism in our consumer society, and that just as it's behind the rise of portrayals of violence and sexuality in the media, it's also behind the rise of consumerism that has used the decoupling of a shared value system from popular culture to sell products with these sensationalist depictions of said violence and sexuality. Like it or not, nihilism is now the fabric from which the cloth of marketing and consumption are spun. And just as nihilism breeds consumerism, consumerism breeds nihilism. Not just in some abstract, highfalutin sense, but in a real, gut-level, emotional transaction. Because you are being bombarded by 3,000 advertisements a day, non-stop. And if you took everything as it is presented to you, prima facie, you'd be tricked by every piece of clickbait, every infomercial, every billboard. It's a real battle that we face every day, and it's hard not to feel jaded. It's hard not to feel that all politicians are lying to further their own aims, that real displays of pathos are just well-calculated manipulations designed to get something out of you. It's hard not to think or act this way when we've been marketed to so extensively that we know and evince this operant logic of nihilism on a subliminal level, because we innately know that we are being manipulated, and we've learned to regard sincerity and emotion with derision and sarcasm. We adopt a lazy sort of cynicism where we frame our own opinions ironically to make ourselves immune from the same derision and sarcasm. All of this causes us to feel disempowered and disenfranchised, helping us further regard the world in more nihilistic terms, which causes us to turn to consumerism to fill the void we feel within ourselves. And that's the really fucked up part. Because this is, at its heart, an ideology that promises that we will be happy and socially integrated proportional to our rate of consumption. It's the sort of empty promise that turns out to be infinitely emptier than any of us could have anticipated, as it leads us to increased isolation and consequently ever-increasing levels of consumption. It's a modern Ouroboros, the snake devouring its own tail, and it has taught us that no objective ethos exists, that nothing matters, that there is no meaning to anything except ourselves. Maybe this isn't true to form nihilism per se, but solipsism masquerading as nihilism. I know this can all sound a bit wonkish or egg-headedly academic, but it's not an unimportant distinction to make. Because as much as nihilism sets up the perfect feedback loop of self-justification, as much as we deny the meaning of everything, we still find ourselves unable to deny the importance of ourselves. At the end of the day, when I close my eyes, there is only me, the most important person I know. And when I wake, it's still just me narrating in my own head, the happy protagonist to my own tale. No matter what my experiences are, I am always the most immediate being. And it's my hunger that matters more, it's my needs that are more important. We are Cartesian, if only in this very basic selfishness. None of this should come as a revelation to any of you who have smoked weed or done any amount of intermediate psychedelics. The real insight here is that this base level solipsism that we all carry within us has been ruthlessly expanded upon. So much so that the commercial map of our self-centeredness has become the territory. For me, it started before I was aware of what was happening. When I was growing up in the early 90s, I, like most of you probably did, watched an obscene amount of television, most of it youth-oriented cartoons or Nickelodeon. As a result, I can still recall an ungodly number of slogans, pitches, theme songs, catchphrases, product warnings, logos, mascots, and brand identifiers. At that age, I didn't recognize the naked solipsism in "Me want honeycomb," or "Gotta have my pops," or "Lego my ego," or how those same actions would seem absolutely ridiculous in a car commercial targeted to adults. I couldn't recognize that the map was being expanded, that my own nascent greed as a homunculus proto-consumer was being exclusively catered to, that all of these ideas growing in me would have catastrophic effects on me as a young man and throughout my adult life. Because here's the thing. These weird, protean forms of solipsism have a way of slowly invading all aspects of your day-to-day life. Like if you have roommates, you might notice how you always mysteriously seem to be doing more housework than them, which might be the precise reason you stop doing housework. Or how if you have a spouse, you always seem to be quantifying contributions to the relationship, whether material or otherwise, and if some perfectly impossible balance isn't reached, you'll feel resentful and might break up, which may or may not explain the alarmingly high divorce rate in this country. And there are an innumerable amount of ways that this thinking can infect your life. Because even though you probably don't believe that you are the literal center of the universe, every single advertisement you've been exposed to has told you just that. You've been told without hesitation that your needs and desires are by far the most immediate. At some point, you start believing it. It's the reason I no longer identify as an activist or an environmentalist, because it's an inherently solipsistic narrative, one where everyone else is part of the problem, and only you and those of your ilk represent the solution. There's an absolute sanctimony that's built into this way of thinking, a transparent need for both validation and superiority that is inherently repulsive no matter what your beliefs are or what your cause is. It's the reason that people who are self-proclaimed anythings, whether they're atheists, vegans, gamers, socialists, or foodies, are almost universally annoying, because their labels have less to do with those particular things and more to do with themselves, and the fact that they want to be seen as those things. If you have Facebook, you probably know who I'm talking about, as you no doubt have some friend or relative who is attention hungry and tone deaf to the hypocrisy of their own self-righteousness. And regardless of whether it's PETA or Greenpeace or the Sierra Club, there are bumper stickers and t-shirts and coffee mugs and tote bags you can buy so you can advertise how ecologically sound your choice is, how good your taste in brands of environmentalism is, how refined your palate and consumption. You are still consuming products which serve to reassure you that you are right, that you are always right, the justified center of the cosmos. There are countless numbers of traps and dead ends like this that await you all in life, all of which are different facets of the ideology of consumerism, impediments placed in our own minds to prevent changes in the current programming. These are learned behaviors that we replicate because we have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. We like things this way. At the end of the day, that's the bitter truth. We want things this way. No one is pointing a gun to our heads and forcing us to think this way. We are 5% of the global population, and we consume 30% of the world's resources and contribute to 30% of its waste. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why. It's sickening to think that even while we're having this conversation, we are kind of floating along, sunbathing on a raft made from the corpses of all the victims of our consumption. So if you want an answer to the why of our current crisis, you need look no further than your own bathroom mirror. Because at the heart of all of this is a complete perversion of our values by consumerism. Think about it. Your entire code of ethics and morals has only existed to allow you to feel comfortable participating in the greatest form of aggregated injustice and destruction that's ever existed. And that's really, really fucked up. And I'm sorry, but each and every one of you is directly responsible. You simply cannot exist and try to deny your participation in all of this. And while all this is sad, this is not a moment for self-pity. We can't expect to change the world if we can't be bothered to change ourselves. The worst thing we can do is use the suffering of the world as an excuse for not taking responsibility for the actions we willfully committed. If you think I'm exaggerating, think again. This morning I read an article that Nestle, the largest food company in the world, admitted to using slave labor and coercion in the manufacture of its pet foods, Fancy Feast and Purina. The same wet cat food I feed my cat every day. From slaves. This shit is not a game. These are not abstract things or academic problems. These are matters of life and death. In your lifetime, it's only going to get worse. The Earth's temperature will continue to rise. So will the sea level and the death toll and everything else. Politicians will continue to give lip service to these issues, but the will to catalyze those hollow words into actions will still be incumbent on you. It will still be up to you to change yourself, your community, your nation, and your world. And who knows what strange new calamities the future will bring, and what disasters will accompany the existing ones. I read another article this morning about how I shouldn't eat any crab from California because they're all tainted with a neurotoxin called domic acid. God knows what else is next. One of those often thrown about cliches is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. And yet despite all you've read or heard, your mind has already asked, is asking, or is about to ask, what can I do about it? Or, so what? Or some variation thereof. Despite everything I've said, you're still holding on to the last vestiges of your defense mechanisms. You're an addict. So am I. We all are. It's easy. But the question looms, what can you do about it? If you're like me, you know next to nothing about being in the real world, or what that entails. You'll want someone to tell you what to do. Well, I don't have any prescriptive advice to make the world a better place to live. I don't know how to make this all better. I don't have any magical solutions. I can't tell you to vote for Bernie Sanders and it will all go away. I can't tell you that if you just do meatless Mondays at Chipotle, the world will be a better place. Maybe all I'm asking is that you don't leave this place of discomfort you're in so readily, that you think about what you can do to exercise what semblance of choice you still have left, to do something, anything, about the predicament you're in. Because it's a choice. The truth is, when confronted with the social and ecological disaster at your doorstep, you choose to do nothing. It's a deliberate choice. At least I'm making it one by telling you that you have a choice. So now, whether you like it or not, it's a conscious choice. And now, of course, it's your choice to continue making that choice or not. If you choose to, you can stick to the path of least resistance and just keep doing what you're doing. I won't blame you, and I'm sure no one else would. Social action for change requires a lot of time and energy, and worse than that, it requires being sincere enough to be vulnerable. It would require that you occasionally share things on your social media that might make you appear mawkish and risk getting no likes, no upvotes, no heart-shaped affirmatives, that you share opinions that make people feel uncomfortable, that you publicly question how you conduct your life. You'd be fighting an uphill battle, and there'd be plenty of times when you just won't want to. But you know now, as I do, that what we want is very often what we need. It's a choice. You are still in the checkout lane. You can hear the faraway drone of Katy Perry singing "Do You Ever Feel Like a Plastic Bag" over the beep beep of the cashier scanner and the rustle of plastic bags. Make your choice. It's time to pay. It's time to go.